for the evening to alcoholic beverages and some spicy food or something. I don't know. So we have now Craig Barr, who's going to be taking us through the latest release, Mudbox 2011, and it is truly a fantastic release. I think anyone who's looked at it is going to be is pleasantly surprised by the sheer number of new things going on here. So, Craig, now that I've added a little pressure to your experience, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Sean. How about that reel? These darn kids these days, my stars. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the new features here in Mudbox 2011. Some of the big things that we want to take a look at are some of the cool new sculpting abilities and the way to store, export, and work with data in a very unique format here. So first thing I'm going to do is just start to work on this kind of base. It's kind of a mid-res mesh on here, and I'm going to use my little foamy brush on a, let's just grab a little layer here, and I'm going to turn my mirroring on, and I'm just going to use this to start kind of working in some of the base shapes here. So I'm just going to make sure I'm using a bit of a low fall off on here. And you can see as I'm going here, I can just start to bulk out some of these shapes. I can inverse my brush, of course, as I go, and I can kind of build in these bulk forms in here and just start to get an overall workup of the character on there. We'll just reveal kind of a finished body adjustment layer on there. I'm just going to step up another level of subdivision in here. And with that same foamy brush there, I can start to take advantage of how it works as kind of a build-up type of brush. And I can start to do these kind of bulk kind of tendons and arteries and different veins and things like that, just to kind of start to form them in as we go. And let's just step up to another level here. In Mudbox 2011, one of the big things that we're introducing is the ability to take advantage of vector displacement. Vector displacement is a 32-bit floating point image that goes beyond the level of displacement. So what happens here is we're not just storing the height data, we're actually storing the directional data on top of that as well. So we get some pretty unique results. So the first thing I'm going to show you is just how to use some of those things as a tool. So if I go into any of these brushes here, by the way, and I click Add Tool, whatever brush I'm on, I can set as a preset or create my own custom tool in here. So I have a couple little presets I've made, and what I'm doing to use these vector displacements is I'm using a strength of 100. I've got my buildup of 100 on here as well. And let's just take a look at one of these stamps right here. So we have this kind of neat wrinkle effect. And let's take a look at what that does. We'll just bring this up and make sure my spacing is down a little bit on this so we can get a nice kind of cutting effect in there. And I'm just going to bring the strength down a bit on that. And we can start to get these kind of cutting effects into into my mesh here. And an interesting thing about working with a tool like this with vector displacement, I can go to the bottom of this tool, and we have default, the direction is average normal, but I can set it to the camera. So my idea is that if I zoom right in here and work with these folds, I'm actually sculpting now, just to show this here. If I go this way, it's sculpting to my view. So here's the difference. If I go into this direction here, I'm sculpting based off of that direction. So I can start to get some kind of nice little folds and different things like that going into my mesh here. So let's just turn the strength up a little bit. And we can just take this tool here, based off my view, I can just start to kind of rough in some kind of little folds and little wrinkles that I want to work with on here. And then as we go along here, we'll just, let's just reveal some of these little folds that we can start building up in here. And I'm working with my ambient occlusion as I go as well. So now we can take a look at some other little cool things with vector displacement maps. I'm going to turn my mirroring off. I'm going to hop in this little vector displacement stencil brush I've custom created here. And what I want to do is turn my fall off actually to a full fall off effect on here. And then in my stencil, you see down the bottom tray here, I've created a couple custom maps that I can work with. So one of them I want to work with is this little throat effect in here. And you see as the maps come up, these vector displacement maps, you see these interesting color hues here. And the color hues represent the different height and directional values of the vectors in there. So we're going to zoom right in on this guy's throat here. And I've built this little kind of throat iris type of thing. And we just start kind of, well, put this on a layer here to display. And you see I'm just painting that live right in there. Now what's happening there? Let's zoom in and take a look. You see I'm getting from that image undercuts and overhangs, things you can't get from a normal displacement map. So pretty powerful way to work. That's just from one basic image. So I can build a library of creature kind of effects and tools and start to build that up and have my own little custom library of things as I go. Go back to the stamp here, jump into this brush here. I'm just going to turn my stencil off and use this little, I built a little fang here. And let's turn on our mirroring for this. And just to show what this does here, we'll make it a little bit larger. I'm going to put the strength up here. I'm going to put a full fall off on this brush as well. And I want my stamp spacing spaced out quite a bit, so we can just, let's just step up actually here. Step up a level of detail on this guy here. Here we go. And what I can do is I'm going to just start working with these little fangs here. I'm just going to make the spacing a little bit different here. And you see what I'm getting here again. This is just from an image, and we get these little twists and curves and undercuts, things that you can't get from a regular image. So let's go ahead and put these into the mouth of my creature here. And we can just kind of line this up. Maybe we'll make these guys here just a little bit smaller, and I want to rotate that around. That's... I'm just trying to get it so that we're kind of facing in. There we go. I knew I'd get it. You guys didn't lose faith in me. You knew I could do it. Okay, so here we go. So we just start kind of bringing in some of these fangs here. And you'll notice that as I'm working, I'm mirroring that effect in there. And I can adjust the strength or the push, the pressure on my tablet as I go. So I can just start to kind of work these things in. Maybe we adjust some of the size of them here to get these little smaller ones here. And let's go a little bigger inside the mouth, down into here. And as I'm working, I have my shadows and ambient occlusion on. So you see we got these nice little fangs built up from these images here. And I'm going to jump back to the stamp. And I've created this little kind of gill structure in here as well. And let's just put that into, actually we just reveal our another mouth there, so there's kind of a finished mouth with a bunch of little stamps and things like that. And we can go into the side of this guy, and I just want to kind of push these little gill effects in here. Maybe one more. There we go. So we can get these kind of gill effects going into the side of his head. Maybe we'll put them over this way a bit. And we can see that we're getting these nice kind of undercuts. So you can see that we're getting right down inside the geometry there. That's kind of an important thing to note, what's happening in there. And the interesting thing about these vector displacement maps here, you'll notice we have 4 tabs on the top of the viewport. We have a new thing called Mudbox Community, and this is live inside Mudbox. So the idea is that I can go on here and live grab stamps, stencils. I can upload stamps and stencils. If I download them, they go right in my tray, and I can keep going back and forth while I work. I can upload things to the gallery. I can upload tutorials. I can access them right through here. It's a very powerful user tool. Some of the things that you can actually grab from there are some of these vector displacement maps in here as well. So let's take a look at another way that we can work with this here. So I'm just going to go back to my stencil brush again, put a full fall off on that. And I've created some of these little maps here so we get these kind of little sinewy kind of deep cavity effects here. So let's just put one in this guy's little cheek here. And we'll go up in here. So we can get these kind of undercut, kind of overlaying effects in here so that you see that we're carving into the face, and we have these kind of little cavity-like effects that we can build up on our guy here. And I have a couple different variations of those things. So we can start to place these little details or effects. Maybe we'll put some right here along his throat and his chest here. And you can see, it's also worth noting, I'm using a stencil with mirror on, something that wasn't available before Mudbox 2010. It's very powerful, obviously, with vector displacement maps here as well. So we can just take a couple of these different little effects and kind of plug them in here. Actually, I have an interesting little use of a sheet here, kind of like a stencil decal sheet. I've got 4 different variations of some kind of skin effects or creature kind of skin effects on here that I just sculpted up and rendered out as vector displacement maps. And I can just start rolling around with that kind of decal map and start rubbing those in to get a couple different effects on the character overall. So let's just take a look at kind of a finished version of that. And while we're on that, within the Mudbox community, something really fun people like to see here. This is free to the Mudbox user world out there. This is just a little this is a vector displacement map that we can grab off of here, put it on a new layer. And I've got it upside down on there, so we'll just bring this in just to show the overall power of what's happening on here. I'm not going to leave this on my character, but if I rotate around, you're seeing that's coming from one image. So that's sculpted somewhere else, rendered out with vector displacement, 32-bit floating point image, and we get that full effect in there. So we get the geometry pulling right out. So it's limitless what you can do here. Just to show another bulk scale of that, I can do something here with, I modeled this up separately, just outside of this. So I started building this library before I had the creature completely conceptualized. And then what I can do is I can start to bring in these kind of bulk things. So you're not limited to size, like those stamps or anything in here. And we'll just turn off that, and I can just kind of hammer that chest plate right into his the front there. And you see we're getting these, I know I keep saying, take note here, but these little undercuts and these little caverns that we have under here, that's what's important here. This is pretty cool. This is one of our beta testers called this game-changing, and I think it is. We can build this whole library, and you can go to town. You can actually pull a full appendage right out of your character with this data as well. So let's just move ahead with this guy. And then the last thing I have for the vector displacement here is the ability to just take advantage of another little stamp on here. So let's go to a stamp. And I created this kind of little spine plate. And so we go into our little spine plate on here, and I have to rotate that. Let's see our fall off brush. I want a full fall off on that guy there as well. So let's see what we get on there. So it's backwards, and I want to adjust the stamp spacing on it. So you can see that the way that this little detail was modeled, I put an overhang on one side and the other part falls down underneath. So I can take these displacement maps and I can stack them over top of each other, right? So the idea is that I can just flow right down this creature's spine here. So you can see I get these nice kind of details. And if I want to get a nice flow to it, I can always turn on my steady stroke. And you can see that we get these nice, smooth kind of steady strokes. I can set the length of that on there. So you get all these nice little effects in here. Let's just turn that one off. Another thing that we can do is, of course, just bring this down. And if we want this guy a little bit deformed, he's kind of a morbid little guy. I don't know what's wrong with him here. But so what we can do is we can start to adjust this spine here and get this kind of morbid kind of spine, just using our grab brush, of course, right? So then I took this a little bit further here, and I just put some little undercuts on the top and on the bottom of this spine. And then we can just kind of move up the chain here so that we can model away. And the important thing to note here is I can take a bunch of different vector displacements and essentially, again, access that library and completely detail a creature just from custom-made pieces built outside or within Mudbox, and just access them and kind of rub them in as I go. So let's just actually step up here to another level of subdivision here. Nice thing about vector displacements, it gives you a really accurate replication of your original geometry that you created, and you can get some nice results as you use it to sculpt. So there's just kind of an ambient skin detail on this guy here. So let's go take a look at some of the map extraction tools. So vector displacement can be rendered out of Mudbox here, or extracted out of Mudbox. You'll see in the extract texture maps, we still have ambient occlusion, vector displacement, displacement, and normal. So it's worth noting, if we click on displacement map, previously the way it was is you had your locate method was ray casting. We now have the ability to take advantage of our new subdivision extraction, which is a very accurate, fast way to get these details. Vector displacement mapping is extracted only using subdivision. Very accurate, very quick way, and as long as your mesh is congruent, meaning that you have your high-res mesh and your base target map, you'll be able to use this subdivision method to grab your maps right out of there. So as well within, that's just in the displacement map, you have that option. So in our vector displacement map, you don't have any of the options. It's going to use subdivision, and it's only going to use a 32-bit floating point format. So you can change the resolution, of course, anti-aliasing. You can work in different vector spaces, tangent, object, or world, and we can go ahead and render that out. The other thing that I want to do here is with our ambient occlusion, our normal map, you'll notice that in there we have preview as paint layer. Same with our normal map here at the bottom, preview as paint layer. And the reason why that is we've added a new normal channel into our paint channels here. So previously it was a bump map, which we still have. And with the normal channel now, you can work outside and independently from bump. So you're working completely with a normal map channel. So I'm actually going to step this guy down in resolution here, and we can work with... actually, while we're in here, we'll take a look at the ambient occlusion, the full map on here. So if I turn that on, if I write out my ambient occlusion, it's going to drop that as a paint layer. And up to now, with 2011, with Mudbox, I had to go out to Photoshop and use the Photoshop interoperability, which Mudbox is strong with, and be able to multiply or blend that map in outside of Mudbox. Well, now we've added blending layers. Blending to all of our layers within Mudbox. So I can multiply this guy live right inside my scene. So that's nice. I can work with that. I can use add effects, screen, or overlay in there as well. So let's just multiply that guy. Just going to step down in the resolution of my character here. And we're just going to take a look at actually some of the normal mapping on here. So I can just display a normal map. And the normal map, of course, can be blended. And the important thing about this being on its own channel is you can actually paint normal maps in here. So you can paint right on the normal map. You can take existing normal maps that exist outside of Mudbox from another character, take portions of that, use it as a stencil, for example, and paint things like wrinkles or different effects from an existing character or another normal map right onto your model or your sculpt there. So we'll just turn that off. We'll take a look at some of the other painting tools here. I'm just going to reveal some of these textures in here. We just have kind of like little bone effects and kind of cartilage effects on this guy here. And a base skin in here as well. And then we have some veins that we've can kind of stencil on. And we can multiply all these type of effects in here, or maybe even do an overlay to kind of get kind of an under the skin kind of look. We can leave that in there. And you can see that we've just kind of put some little hues, some kind of temperature hues here, pinks and blues and different things like that. The teeth are all painted up here, and the mouth uses a stencil that goes right inside the mouth there to access that as well. So yeah, he's a pretty good-looking guy. And another thing that we can actually do here, you'll notice that I have an incandescence channel. So this is new in Mudbox 2011 as well. So let's actually just paint up a little channel. I'm just going to use one of the default. I'm going to go to my paint tools here. I'm just going to use a paintbrush. I'm not going to texture project this. I'm just going to use one of the default black and white splatter brushes that's in Mudbox here. And if we rotate this guy around, we're going to take some of these splatters and add some kind of like splotchy effects to this guy's skin here. And let's just change our color of this brush. So let's make it maybe maybe a deep kind of orange. You'll notice the color chooser now is new in Mudbox 2011. It matches exactly the color chooser available in Maya. So quite an extensive one. Custom palettes here, RGB, HSV. For your color wheel, you have a ring to access here, a spectrum. You can bring an image in and sample colors from a specific image or texture. And you can use a four-point or four-corner blending as well to grab your custom colors that you want to work with. So let's go with this little orange on here for now. Why not? So we can just kind of zoom into our, let's just zoom in a bit here, get some of these kind of splats going on here. And I'm just going to paint that in. Let me turn my fall off here. Oh, what is going on here? There we go. So actually I'll turn that color back to that orange that we had there. Yeah, there we go. There we go. So we're just getting these kind of splotchy little effects in here as we go. And what we can do with that now is take advantage of a bunch of the new paint tools. So down on the bottom here, you're going to notice that we have a bunch of new paint tools in the tray here. So everything from blur, dodge, burn, contrast, sponge is a saturation brush, hue, shift, and an invert. So you get the negative effect of it. That's actually handy for creating little bump maps from your diffuse map there as well. So I'm going to jump in and play with some of these here. I can start to work on the saturation using my sponge brush. I can desaturate it, or if I put down the amount to a negative value, I'm actually increasing the overall saturation on there. So very handy for painting. You don't have to go outside of Mudbox here nearly as much to do anything. Another thing worth noting in the paint layers, is that we have the ability to actually export a full channel now to Photoshop. So we used to just export layer by layer, image by image. We can now bring out an entire channel, whatever channel that may be, work on it in Photoshop, save it back live, and do a live refresh, a live bridge with Photoshop on the full complete channel. So really powerful painting abilities there. So with the hue, I can change the hue on the fly. It's not going to affect the luminance or anything. It's just going to affect the overall hue on my splots. So you can see I'm just affecting the hue on that splatter that I painted in. Hue shift is interesting. What this does here is the number, the numeric value represents the degrees along the color wheel. So it's defaulting there at 30. So it's going to access 30 degrees around there, and I can keep changing that. So maybe we'll crank that up a bit, and I'm accessing different, I'm shifting that hue based on the degrees of the color wheel there, which is nice. And then contrast, pretty self-explanatory. I can go in and I can up the contrast on sections of my paint on there. So we just kind of make it a little more contrasty. And then with our dodge and burn, of course, what we can do is we can take advantage of darkening and lightening our texture here. So I can darken this overall value here. I can take my dodge brush and I can brighten that up. We can do things like that. In our incandescence layer down here now, just before I do something on there, well, actually, I did show the blending here, but you know, with the you can get a bunch of different effects with your blending, and you can keep those live, multiply, screen, overlay, and paint within those while in that blending preset. So with our incandescence channel down here, what this will allow us to do, let's paint up some different kind of little effects on this guy's chest here. So incandescence is just going to give us kind of a kind of glowy type of effect live here right in Mudbox while we're working. So we can start to kind of get these kind of little glowy effects. You start multiplying that and changing this with the blends, and you can get some kind of interesting little skin effects as you go. And of course with the lighting, some HDR lighting and things like that, you can get some really nice effects. And then just to show, just kind of over-exaggerate here, we'll take a really bright red, and we can go right into the eyes, and we get these really intense kind of incandescence kind of looks in here as well. So with the incandescence here, just like any layer within Mudbox, I can take any of them and interchange them, right? So I can paint specular on my diffuse layer and then drag that down if I want, so I can just have a bit of a better visual contact there as I work. If I take this little splotty paint layer and drag that down to my incandescence here, we'll put that right in, and you see we get this little, I don't know where he's been, some kind of nightclub rave type thing. Again, I tell you, these kids these days. Yeah, he's probably out playing paintball. Anyway, so what we can do here is, we'll just turn that off in here. We can play with a couple different little lighting presets in here. Actually, before I do that, though, let's go take a look at something else very cool within Mudbox here. So I'm going to jump into my sculpt layers and put down another layer down here. I'm just going to turn off my stencil. We don't need that on anymore. Jump back, and you'll see down on the bottom here, we used to always have 3 trays. It's expanded. We now have a 3rd tray, pose tools. So in Mudbox, we now have the ability to pose our character. So the idea with posing is that we can store these poses on layers and very quickly pose and get an overall result of some different effects or looks for our character here. The pose tools were designed by the dev team, just like a lot of the other tools in Mudbox. They want it to be quick, fast, get in there, very artist-friendly. So if I grab this joint, you'll see we've got just a simple little ball little tool here. And I just click, and I drag to adjust my overall fall off here that I want. And you see this little arrow, and we'll just leave it in that direction there. And now the weighting highlights in green to show my overall posing for this. So I can just start to use my pose tool now, and it's just in the viewport. I can actually grab my, I'm just going to turn off the ambient occlusion there. I can grab it within my view here. I can start to pose by view, or I can grab the joint itself and bring it up and down. Another thing that we can actually do, if I highlight over it, it's telling me that I can use a couple different effects here. I can use a middle mouse button to scale that, and if I shift scale it, I can proportionally scale that. So we can use this, aside from just a posing tool, we can use it as a modeling tool, very effective modeling tool. You can get different twist effects and things like that as well, right? There's a move pivot tool, so I just moved the pivot a little more into the middle of his shoulder just to kind of work with that. And then, of course, you see we're getting a little bit too much coming down here, so I can paint those weights out if I wanted to. And what I can do is just kind of control, just same as the other brushes, I'm just taking away some weight from that arm. And of course I can add to it. So you can see that it's deforming live in there as well. It's worth noting as well the pose tools within Mudbox. You can take advantage of those and build up your pose library in there. Use them again, like I said, for a bunch of different things, not just posing. They're great modeling and sculpting tools. But as well with posing in Mudbox, we can take advantage of full FBX skeletons. So the FBX story doesn't end there. We can now do a one-click kind of solution here from Mudbox, send to Maya. So if we just click that, it's just going to fire out and package up everything that I want it to package up, fire it off to Maya. Inversely from Maya, I can say one-click, send to Mudbox, and via FBX, we can fire that model right into Mudbox here as well. So everything from blend shapes to image planes to FBX skeletons. So I could bring an FBX skeleton over with all of its weighting, access that skeleton, and use that for my posing while I sculpt. One of the last things I want to point out here is that some of the new little render changes here, or the menu changes here. So we have a new render menu here, and we've moved our save screen image up into there. So same setup as it was before. And we now have the ability to create a turntable movie. And you see we have some nice little presets in there. It'll take your screen res, your 3D view, and you can go all the way up to full HD, 1920 by 1080, so 1080p on there. We have YouTube-friendly presets in there. And this is pretty cool. You can go ahead and write out, set the number of frames. You can set the playback speed that you want to do this at. And we can actually, let's just view one here. Sorry, I'm just digging. I should have had this open. Steven's going to yell at me. So anyways, we can write out a bunch of different formats. We can write out a Flash version, QuickTime version. There's an MP4 version in there as well. Oops, this is the wrong one in here. I'll just go into this media folder here and pull up a little turntable movie on there. So we're going to start to render that out using HDR lighting, any of the shadows as well, unlimited lights and shadows. And you can send this off in your kind of character pipeline for approval purposes, whatever it may be, texture approval, shader approval, whatever it might be. And we also have on there the ability to, in the Mudbox community, you can upload that to the gallery. So we have a turntable section in the gallery. You can upload your turntables live to the Mudbox community, as well as you can view other artists' turntables there. The last thing here is this record movie. We can actually record a sculpt session now. So artists can record a specific technique or just something they want to do. They can do a speed sculpt in here. You can set the frame playback here, the frame recording. You can